Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dopper's Deep Dives. And my name is Caitlin, and I'm the Impact Specialist at Dopper for the UK, and I'm also your host for this evening. So we have a really special evening lined up for you tonight because we have arrived at a very unique moment in our history. A crisis is currently unfolding, and it's not just the pandemic, but also the ecological and climate crisis. We know that species are becoming extinct. Extended periods of drought are causing bushfires to disrupt important habitat. And soon there will be more plastic in our oceans than fish. And science is warning us that we are nearing a point of no return. But then all of a sudden, the pandemic struck us and the subsequent lockdown happened. And all of a sudden, we started to see positive effects. And I think you guys would have all read the headlines of lower carbon emissions and cities becoming smog-free and wildlife taking over cities again, sort of reclaiming lost habitat. And whether this is really true or whether this is just planet positive PR, so to speak, I do think we have a real opportunity here to really harness this downtime to make a permanent change, because we don't want to go back to normal, because we know that going back to normal was the issue. So that's why we've decided to dive deeper into exactly this topic tonight, to really harness this unique moment in time to purposefully and collectively reflect as a society on how we can build a better future. And we're not doing it alone. We've got some really great minds to think with us tonight. So first you'll be hearing from Kristine Berg, and she'll be introducing the topic of circularity from her point of view, which is that of the Circular Economy Advisor at TOMRA. TOMRA is one of the world's leading companies in technology-led resource collection. Following that, you will hear from that of how a global organization such as Heineken integrates circularity within their strategy. And then finally, we will hear from Nadja, who's joining us from the University of Groningen. And she will be approaching circularity from the aspect, I guess, kind of more of a human aspect, where she, because her research is into how the outside natural world impacts the intrinsic motivations of people to live and act more sustainably. We have a really stellar lineup of speakers tonight, but before we dive into that, we're first going to hear from our own CEO at Dopper, Virginia, and we'll also hear from our friends at the Student Hotel, who are the presenting partners tonight, and they will also be providing sitting back. I hope you're relaxed and maybe with a glass of water, or maybe even a beer, and I hope that you are ready to over you as we deep dive into a circular society to mend the post-corona planet. So now I will be handing over to Virginia.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining tonight. As the CEO of Dopper Social Enterprise, we are very, very, very happy to welcome you all to Dopper Deep Dives, our first edition of the Dopper Deep Dives, about Dopper and especially about our ambitions concerning circularity. Dopper's mission is to empower people to choose reusable or for single-use water bottles to save our world's water sources. In order to get there, we of course have our bottles. With the proceeds of the bottle, we initiate projects to create awareness, education, and change. A big awareness campaign we did at Schiphol last year, telling travelers about the Dutch delicious tap water and inspiring them on how to drink from the tap wherever they go. An example of our education program is the Changemaker Challenge Junior, a design competition for 12 years old, challenging them to come up with solutions for the plastic pollution problem. So far, we have reached over 26 1,000 kids with this program. And to drive change, we work, for example, with NGO Simavi to fund aid projects in Nepal. But also, closer to home, we initiate programs, so stay tuned because I have a special announcement linked to this. In all these projects, we work with a no waste policy to make our footprint as small as possible. And this goes also for our bottles, of course. People in this webinar probably know our bottle. The design was made by Rinko van Riemortel, winner of the design competition our founder Marijn initiated back in 2009. As you can see, it is not only a bottle, but also, in fact, if you turn the bottle upside down, you're literally putting tap water on a pedestal. In the production process, we want to be as circular as possible. Therefore, we are very proud that our original bottle is Cradle to Cradle certified. And by the end of this quarter, all our bottles will be Cradle to Cradle. And to get this certification, we are being audited on these 5 elements. Our main manufacturers already with the basic principles of circularity. They are audited on energy use and fair treatment of employees. The material suppliers refrain from using hazardous substances and are asked to share the secret of their materials. Our logistical partners are responsible for the use of energy. Dopper will take responsibility within the net zero program for that use by offsetting the carbon footprint, but I think we can challenge them more into lowering the actual footprint. So that will be a next step for us. Since Dopper bottles have to comply with food safety regulations, there are very high barriers to recycle the bottles within our own production loop for the products. For Dopper, our design principles are very much aligned with the circular economy. We use the Cradle to Cradle certification program as a benchmark to see if we are on the right track. The next step after the certification of all bottles is the road to gold. The combined program is rather technical, but it basically comes down to this. Continued test program to find the proper renewable materials. Plastic that is not based on fossil feedstock. Optimize the design for reuse and recycling. Set up a take-back program for discarded bottles, and minimize energy and water use further down the value chain. So, enough from our side. Let's move on to our friends from the student hotel. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Amber, and I'm the impact manager here at the Student Hotel. And as a co-hosting partner of the Dopper Deep Dives, I have the opportunity to share a bit more about what we as TSH do when it comes to sustainability and how we look at the future, specifically also on circularity. So I'll just share my screen with you. So for those of you who don't know us, we are the Student Hotel. We were founded in 2013 by Charlie McGregor. We currently have 14 locations in Europe. And when Charlie started the Student Hotel, he looked around at student housing in the Netherlands specifically first. And he thought, well, I think students deserve better. And not just in terms of where they sleep and where they live, but also on what they experience throughout their studies. So the Student Hotel not only focuses on offering a nice room and a nice place for people to get together and to study, but also very much focuses on interaction. We believe the Student Hotel should be a place where you can learn, but you can also play, you can interact, you can meet new people. And sustainability for us has from the outset been part of our development. Originally, we started out in the first hotels where we would build a new hotel, and throughout the process, we would think of how can we incorporate sustainability or what could we do. And recently, we have created our own CSR department, which I run together with my team, in which we very much look at sustainability as a long-term strategy for us to have, thinking of how can we create the most impact in all the cities that we build our new hotels. I have to be honest, the student hotel was not built as a sustainable company. We are not a social enterprise. We are a commercial company. And so for us, sustainability, we look at it, our definition is we say ASAP, so as sustainable as possible. I have quite a pragmatic approach to that. And we try to combine baby steps with longer term projects to ensure that we contribute as much as we can. It's a big slide. You don't have to read everything, but what we focus on are 3 different pillars. We act, we connect, and we inspire. So we act very much has to do with everything we can do ourselves. We believe that if we want to engage our students to go out and change the world for good, to inspire the people in our co-working place or our guests in the hotel, that we should set the right example. So everything that we can do ourselves within our hotels, within our operations, we should work on to really try to make a difference. Our second pillar, we connect, is that we very much believe in the power of the crowd. As one person or one individual, you can only do so much, but if you bring together different people, and especially if you bring together people from different backgrounds with different experiences and perspectives, we believe that you can create the best possible outcomes and the most impact. Thirdly, we inspire for change. Ultimately, we want to be a driver of change of the industry. We feel that sustainable business practices should be the norm and not the exception to the rule. It's nice to be called a front runner, but in the end, we want to be sure that all hotels and the tourism industry as a whole looks at how can we do business as sustainable as possible. And so we focus a lot on research. We open our hotels for partners who wish to research new products, new services that could push the boundaries of sustainability within tourism. If you talk about our ambition, by 2023, we will have reduced our environmental footprint by 20%. That's a big number. We're just getting started, I have to admit. So currently we are deciding what our footprint entails, what is our carbon footprint. And next up, we are, of course, going to work on different projects to make sure that we reduce that. There's a lot happening already. As you can see, our new impact report is about to be published. So then you can see what we've been working on. But our main focus is on a number of things that we can influence quite significantly ourselves. So first up, we have our real estate. We own all our buildings. So from the outset, from the development of the building, we can have a lot of influence on what we do with them, what kind of materials we use, what kind of suppliers we work with. Next up, waste. Waste is a big project within our operations because, as you can imagine, here in Amsterdam City, in our hotel, we have 570 rooms. That creates a lot of wastes from our students, our guests, our restaurant. So we really work on reducing our residual waste, optimizing waste separation, and in general, bringing waste to a minimum in our hotels. Next up, we have energy because, of course, buildings consume a lot of energy worldwide, and we produce globally, we produce 40% of the world's CO2 emissions. So when it comes to energy, what kind of energy we purchase, how much energy we source ourselves, how we deal with energy within the building, it's a big thing for us to work on. Then we have travel. As I said, we're located all across Europe. So from our business point of view, we will always need to travel, but we want to make sure that we do that as responsible as possible. And we try to encourage train travel over plane, but also, and we're getting a good taste of that now with the lockdown, encouraging Zoom meetings over actual travel. And lastly, we have our suppliers. I think that's the first step that you can take. The people that you work with, you need to make sure that they align with your ambitions and what you work on. Looking ahead, there's one big project that I'd like to highlight, specifically because it also relates to circularity, and that is our new hotel in Delft. It'll open on the 1st of September this year, And as you may know, Delft is a hub of technical innovation, and they are really, I think, the drivers behind a lot of the new innovations and changes that we need in the world. And so what we decided when we knew that we were going to open a hotel there is that we wanted to challenge ourselves as well to push the boundaries within our hotel. And so Delft will be what we call our testing ground for circularity. We are testing new suppliers, new products. We are rethinking our entire design. Here on the photo, you see an example of what will happen. The wall, the spickled wall, that's all recycled plastics. So we are really thinking of what kind of materials do we use. We have had extensive talks with our existing suppliers, but also with new suppliers on how can we make these products circular? What is your business model? How can we partner on this together? And we've challenged ourselves to also think of how can you make a more circular hotel while at the same time remaining true to your brand identity. And so it's a great way for us to test what could work in our hotel, especially considering that we will really have to rethink the tourism industry following the Corona lockdown. And the idea is that everything that we test in Delft, if it works, then we're also going to roll that out in our existing and future hotels. So it's really ourselves to think differently. And so we are very much looking forward to welcome you into this hotel once it opens and to experience how we look at circularity. That was my introduction. I will now give the floor to the speakers, but I will be there during the Q&A as well, should you have any questions. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Amber. And wow, what a great initiative as well. The Delft Hotel, it looked really cool, but also just really great to see that is going to be your testing ground for circularity. So sort of shaped her career as a circular economy advisor. So welcoming to the virtual stage now is Kristine Berg. I hope she's there. Yes, here she is.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, Caitlin. And it's so cool to be here. I'm loving this event already. And it's just a really nice way to really deep dive into what circularity is and how we move forward with a planet that in so many ways needs to heal. So from a sort of nerdy perspective, this is a really good breadth of topics to dive into. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you guys so we can get going on the presentation. There we go. Great. So, I wanted to dive into a little bit what really is my passion, which is the ocean, and then also ocean plastics. And to me, what I've learned through my career and also through some recent experiences really is that the circular economy and ocean plastics are quite closely linked. A little bit about me first. It's always nice to get to know people. This is a bit of a throwback. I'm Kristine. I've grown up in Norway along the deep fjords and steep mountains. This is me as a kid being out on the fjord with my granddad, he taught me how to fish. He taught me about the simple joys of being out to sea. And he really also taught me about how to enjoy being out there and then sustaining yourself, but taking only what you need. We never fished more food than we needed when we were there for the summers. I still love being out to sea. I still love taking naps. But obviously for a lot of people who are passionate about the ocean and have a deep relationship to the ocean, for a lot of people that has transitioned into a relationship with plastic and ocean plastic pollution. Currently, I work for TOMRA as a circular economy advisor. And some of you, depending on where you are in the world and where you're watching this from, might be familiar with TOMRA. A little bit of another throwback. This is where TOMRA as a company started, founded by two brothers in Norway about 50 years ago. And what you're seeing here in this picture is the world's first reverse vending machine. Now, TOMRA invented the reverse vending machine, the RVM as we call it, which automizes collection, take back of empty beverage containers. This was needed in grocery stores where they just were getting back, all these empty milk bottles, wanting to make it more efficient and also to keep better track of how much they were getting into their stores. So that was where that need arose. And obviously, this is the world's first machine that was ever developed. So that was designed and developed by TOMRA back in the day, but it has developed a lot since then. So if you're in Norway, or if you're in the Netherlands, Germany, maybe, there's in states in the US and in Australia, this is more what you would see as part of your daily grocery shopping routine, where you have these reverse vending machines in the stores that take back empty bottles and cans. And a little snapshot of TOMRA as a company, which is interesting because it says something about the perspective we have on this challenge. It's a big company. We're about 4,500 employees globally. And the collection side of it is where it started. But obviously, we're also more than that because we really use resource optimization technology and using sensors for that. So it's really about making the most value of what we extract so that we can really sort of, that we are delivering the highest possible quality so that the market really is, the market really grows for these materials. So we're working in mining industry, in recycling industry. So that means we're not just taking back the empty bottles and cans in supermarkets, but we're also further down the value chain in the processing aspect of materials such as plastic and metal. And also in food, we're a diverse company. In New Zealand, we sort blueberries with artificial intelligence. And I think around 75% of the world's French fries comes from potatoes that have been through a TOMRA machine. So we're very much able to have that value chain perspective, which is important also in this with this topic. And then how do we know Dopper? Well, I actually have my X-Expedition bottle here that I got sailing with them recently. X-Expedition, as you see from this picture, is a partner of TOMRA. We're sponsoring this organization that is out doing research on ocean plastic around the world. You see our logo there on the boat. You can't really see it, but I'm one of those 14 women up on deck. This picture is from 2018 when we set sail to go through the Great Pacific Garbage Patch out in the North Pacific. We're still a partner of X-Expedition. I recently came back after sailing from Easter Island to Tahiti with them. And X-Expedition is an independent organization that, it's an all-women series of all-women scientific voyages around the world to do research on and raise awareness about the ocean plastic pollution issue. So this is very much sort of also a way to not only, really roll up our sleeves and understand the problem, but also connecting, this wide range of these women with a wide range of backgrounds and coming from different geographies to the spectrums of solutions that we have on land to prevent plastic from going astray in the first place. And this is a very useful framework that we also dive into when we're out sailing with X-Expedition, but that you also can keep in mind thinking of where do you fit in this more circular world. So we often talk about a spectrum where when you're out at sea, that's also where the plastic ends up, but you can move really closer to the source, which is what we call upstream. Now, closest to sea, whether it's out to sea or on beaches doing beach cleans, that's often damage control, which is useful, very educational tool, but still there's a lot we can do before that. Then there's downcycling, which is a term that refers to saying if you have, as Virginia was talking about, that there's certain criteria for food packaging. So when you've sort of lost that qualification of the material, maybe you use it for drain pipes or for carpets or fleeces. But then that product, again, is very hard to recycle. So that's what we call downcycling. Then you have really further up, a more upstream solution is the circular economy, where, circular economy can be a bit of a tricky concept to understand, but what it really means is that there is no waste. Everything that we use and make is a resource for something new, and it has value. So that means that someone is actually wanting to use it again after maybe you're done using it for a few minutes or even for a few years. And then you can avoid, which is important conversations that we need to have. You know, thinking about plastic as a material and as an example, what kind of function is it delivering? Is it the material that's most important, or is it the function that we need? So there's a real need to move away from the unnecessary single-use plastics, but which also is a little bit of a complex image understanding what actually is unnecessary in a lot of situations. So this is a very useful framework that you can think about, seeing sort of where can you make an impact, and how can you frame the actions that you take in your everyday life. Obviously, TOMRA, preventative solutions on land, because we know 80% of the plastic that leaks into the ocean comes from land-based sources. So the effect can really be had by having preventative solutions on land, which is what the circular economy offers. And for us, you know, this is me out on the boat for the exhibition in 2018, sorting through surface plastic samples that we had collected. And it's very much about, you know, when we sponsor someone, it's a collaboration. It's very much about getting in there, understanding the problem, rolling up our sleeves and being a part of it. And for me, I like to say that it really goes back to something that I was taught in school. My teacher would always tell me when we were sitting for tests or exams. She would always tell us every time, make sure you read the question 3 times. Because unless you've understood the problem, your answer won't be correct. So that's what it comes back to for us as well, and for me, to really understand the problem that we want to help solve and not just make a bunch of solutions that don't have the desired effect. And, you know, it's been very important for us to, like I said, we as a company, we can really take that value chain perspective, which is super interesting to me because I'm such a systems nerd, so I love that. Because you really need to keep the whole system in mind to develop a fully circular economy, which I'm sure we'll hear more about later as well. But it has been very important for us to use it in our work, in our daily work, to inform that, and also to inform our networks and industry partners that we work with. So this is just an example of what we do out there with Expedition. This picture is from the South Pacific a couple of months ago when we take the manta trawl through the surface water to collect microplastic samples on the surface of the ocean. This is a very common tool to use to understand plastic pollution in the oceans. Some of you might be familiar with it from before. And then when we analyze these samples on board, I got to play with some really, really fun toys when I was out there, where actually we're able to see what kind of polymer are we collecting. And this just blows my mind. It is incredibly exciting because one thing is seeing these, you know, you pull up a sample of maybe 1,000 pieces of microplastics and you've sailed for thousands of kilometers away from everyone else on the planet, such a remote place, and you find all these pieces of debris. And then here, we can actually put it through the microscope, put it through this machine, and we can look at what kind of polymer type is it. This is one of the samples that we put in where you look at the size of it, how would we describe it as a black piece of lime, and then matching that with mass spectroscopy to look at, identify what kind of plastic it is. So this is a polymer resin. And then that is such an important tool to inform policy on land, because once we know what ends up out there, we know what we really need to take better care of on land. And this is an image from an island called Dulce Island. This is part of the Pitcairn Island group, which is UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's one of the most remote islands in the world. The Pitcairn Islands are some of the world's most remote uninhabited islands in the world. It was quite bizarre to have been sailing for more than a week and then coming across this beautiful island. No humans live here, only seabirds. But if, we zoom in a little bit, I want to show you what the final frontier of ocean plastic pollution looks like. Because within these circles, you can really see to the far right, you can see massive balls of fish net that is washed up on the beach. Ghost nets, which we call them, because even though no one is coming out there to pick them up, they still keep fishing. There's a couple of white buoys. There's also a bright red buoy because that's made to float. So obviously that floats really well and across far distances. And on the far left one, I'm not actually, if anyone knows, I'm not sure if that's something you use to monitor birds or something, but to me, it just looks like a cooking stove. And it looks like something that definitely doesn't belong there. And although this is, it's heartbreaking to be out there and to see it in a way that is really hard to describe. But it is also very empowering and motivating, because this to me means that what we do on land has exponential impact. So this is very much, if you went out here, tried to pick this plastic up, that would be damage control. The damage has already happened. The plastic has already gone astray out there. But then on the other end of the spectrum is what we call a deposit return scheme, which is legislation that a lot of our work operates within. And, if you're, like I said, if you're in Germany, if you're in Norway, if you're in the Netherlands, you're familiar with this, where it's basically legislation that says, when you go to the store and you buy a drink, you buy the drink, but you're only borrowing the bottle. The bottle you need to recycle and bring it back. And by putting, what this graph shows is, if you look at UK and France, which currently doesn't have deposit legislation, but it's coming up because it's coming up throughout the EU with the Single-Use Plastic Directive. But you're talking about around 40% recycling rate on beverage containers. But if you put a value to it that literally teaches people the value of that material, you're talking mid to high 90s of collection rates. And what is also important to remember is that on-the-go products, what you consume outside the home, is also the ones that often go astray and that ends up in nature. And then there's, a business aspect to it as well. There's the emotional aspect and environmental aspect. But there's a business aspect that not a lot of people talk about, I feel. If you look at paper and steel as, this is the market for recycled materials. These are quite sort of mature recycling markets where we know quite well the value of the material. But we did some calculations to figure out exactly how much value was being lost with the plastic material. And this is plastic packaging in particular. About 14% is collected for recycling globally every year. That means 86% of plastic packaging ends up directly in nature. It's incinerated for energy, or it ends up in landfill. And a conservative value estimate for that is $50 to $80 billion per year. If you add into it a bigger pot of resin, of polymers, of plastic, you're talking up to $170 billion a year. So it's really just bad business, throwing it away. Now, this one is, what I want you to take away from this one is a little bit complex, but it's about the system. Circular economy is very much having a systems approach, emulating nature. Nothing is waste. Everything is a resource for something new. You need to look both ways in your value chain to understand that. And what I want you to focus on in this graph as well is, if you look on the far right side, how you collect and how you sort and recycle the material has a real impact. Because if you're looking at just mixed plastic that goes through a very generic and sort of everything goes in one bag kind of situation with household recycling, talking about 200 euros per ton. But if you really separate and if you really think about the end market, you think about how can I make someone want to buy this and use it in their products, you're talking up to 7 times that value on the market. So the circular economy really is about sustainability on so many levels. This is a picture from when we were there with the girls, just about to go sailing, we set sail on International Women's Day from Rapa Nui, Easter Island. And the day before, we did a tour of Easter Island to look at all these sacred sites and the national parks with the moai, these stone statues. I actually have a little one here. They're good luck. And as is hazard of the profession, we always, we're drawn to the ocean that's right behind these statues on a platform. We're drawn also to look down at our feet and look what we're finding. This is what that sacred beach looked like. And what is particular also about the issue of ocean plastics and the lack of circularity is that this plastic didn't start on this island. This plastic washes up on their beaches throughout the Pacific in particular, leaving these island states with the responsibility and the burden of collection and of treating the waste material that washes up. So there really is an exponential impact we can have by changing our habits, what we do every single day. And it's important also to ask, like I said before, what function are we asking for rather maybe than what material do we want to make it with? And I'll just leave you with this final quote that I love so much from the Story of Stuff. It's, there's no such thing as a way. Well, I've been to a way. I've been to the Pacific. The closest people to us were in the International Space Station, and still we're seeing toilet seats and washing chairs float by the boat. We know that they have to go somewhere, and they're not going to space. And also, as I've shown you, plastic in particular is way too valuable to end up in the ocean. So that was my presentation. Feel free to jump back in when you want to, Caitlin. And obviously, if you have any questions for me, and something we can talk about later as well, or if you want me to answer them later, then shoot me questions in the chat. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristine. Wow, that was really powerful. And just those figures, how when you attach a value to a certain product, how that recyclability rate actually jumps up to 90%. That's just incredible, really sort of mind-boggling figures. I did have a question for you, because obviously, we know you through Expedition, and I was just really keen to learn a little bit more about that. Like, what was your specific role on the boat, on the voyage, and also what sort of simple little things that you sort of take into your day-to-day job? You sort of touched on it a little bit already, but yeah, we'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours. I won't, but so the latter part of the question first. It's something that has very much informed my everyday life. It's, one thing is having been out there and seen the issue firsthand. And then, if I don't do anything with it, how can I ask anyone else to do anything with it? It's really that sort of like, all right, this is something that I need to be part of solving. And also, when we work with recycling partners as well, ocean plastic is quite sexy. People want to get their hands on it and make products with it. But no one really understands what a supply of ocean plastic looks like. And then having been out there, seeing how degraded it is and how much wildlife that comes up with it and algae and everything, it's really, that has been really useful in several ocean plastic upcycling projects that we've done with TOMRA. So it very much influences my work every single day. And when we're out there on the boat, my colleagues tease me, oh, you're going on a cruise. And I'm just like, it's not a cruise. We work 4-hour shifts. Everyone's doing everything. I had never sailed before I went.
For you, I don't know if we can answer all of them in the Q&A later, but we'll give it a go.
I'll stick around so we can see.
Yeah. So, please keep sending through the questions, guys. Great. So now we'll be moving on to our next speaker of the evening. And this person is responsible for driving the global CSR strategy at one of the biggest beer companies in the world. With over 250 beer brands spanning 190 markets worldwide, it's a huge responsibility. So we're really, really glad that he's able to join us tonight. So now welcoming to the stage is Jan-Willem Vosmeer. Welcome.
Hello. I'm here with Zeiske, and she's trying to get all the techniques done because I'm in the Dopper building. Because the firewalls at Heineken are so strict that they didn't even allow me to go on the network. So that's why I'm at Dopper. So thank you so much. And a wonderful presentation by Kristine. I really liked it. And I hope I can inform you a little bit more about what we are doing on circular economy at Heineken, because that's what I would like to focus on. I'm part of the global sustainability team in Amsterdam. Heineken, you might know of the beer. You might get thirsty when you see this slide. But we do much more than only the Heineken brand. The Heineken brand is the most visible one and the most famous one, but indeed we have more than 250 brands, a lot of local brands around the world, 85,000 employees working in more than 70 countries. We run 170 breweries, but indeed the Heineken brand itself is found in more than 193 countries. There's almost no country in the world where you can't find it. So it's amazing to see as a brand born in Amsterdam more than 150 years ago that actually everyone knows the Heineken brand. And that was very much also the passion of Freddie Heineken, who was the third generation. And now the fourth generation, his daughter, is the main shareholder. Within Heineken, we have a sustainability strategy. We launched it in 2009. We are still running it till 2020, of course, with targets. These are the 6 key areas we focus on, the areas we think are most material for both our stakeholders and our business. It includes water, it includes reducing CO2 emissions throughout the value chain, growing with communities. We are, of course, in many countries around the world, including in Africa, Asia, Pacific, Latin America. Sustainable sourcing, our raw materials, think of barley, but also apples, because we are the biggest cider producer as well. Promoting health and safety, specifically very important in these times of COVID, but also think about roads. And road traffic accidents, because there are a lot of salespeople on the road, specifically in countries where the road conditions are not very good. And of course, our core product is mostly alcohol, more and more no alcohol. And that's why we advocate responsible consumption. I'm not going to dive into that agenda for now. I'm just wanted to give you that context. So what we are doing is really integrating sustainability throughout the business, from barley to bar, so from agriculture to the point of consumption. And that's where we also find solutions where we try to get more and more circular. And of course, it starts with reducing coal, reducing gas, and increase for renewable energy. So our CO2 emissions strategy is called Drop to Sea for 2030. We want to increase our use of renewables in the business, in the production, to 70%. That should translate into a reduction of CO2 emissions of 80%. And that starts, for instance, in using solar panels. This is the solar panels on the roof of the brewery in Den Bosch in the south of Holland. It's actually the biggest solar panel run brewery in the world, having so many solar panels on the roof. And we are actually having 3 out of 5 breweries are in the top 5 of solar run breweries. Now, of course, solar is not the only one. We also have a lot of windmills on premise here in the Netherlands. At Zoeterwoude, we have 4 of these gigantic windmills. It was not an easy journey to get there. It took us 7 years, but now they run 30% of the total electricity of the brewery. But what you don't hear a lot is from companies, because they all focus on electricity, but actually you use also thermal energy, and actually 70% of our total production is using thermal energy, and that's the biggest and the most difficult part. So here, this is an interesting example of how circular economy helps with that, to source biomass in a sustainable way, because there are also a lot of unsustainable ways of sourcing biomass. And these packages are containing rice husks, and rice husks are a byproduct of rice. And normally the farmers, and that is here in Vietnam, actually they threw them away and they burned them in the field, and it created a lot of pollution. But also it was actually, they just threw the waste. And we said we could use it. We could actually use it for our thermal energy. So we're buying these rice husks from farmers so they get an income, and we put them in these machines that are burning them in a very sustainable way without the pollution. And actually it covers our thermal energy in quite some of the breweries in Vietnam. Now, let me go into the production itself, because, of course, production makes waste. There's a lot of kinds of waste, glass, plastic in the production itself, water, etc., wastewater. So we're trying to turn waste into value. And actually, we have our aim is to become zero waste in all our breweries around the world. And zero waste means that you send less than 2% to landfill. Now, in 2009, we produced more than 4 million tons of waste, and actually 97% was recycled or recovered. And actually, it makes business sense. You can make out a profit, or you can earn money with it. So a big chunk of it is spent grains. It's a byproduct of beer, and normally you would throw it away, but actually it's a fantastic product, for instance, for animal food. Farmers love this because it's very nutritious for cows, for instance. So I've been recently in Ethiopia, and I've visited smallholder farmers, and they were really, really happy with this because they were really growing on this. So we sell them for a very moderate price, much lower than a normal price they would buy for food. And they profit from it, and their cows profit from it, and you don't need to waste it. But you can also actually make bread of spent grains. And we did it here in Amsterdam, and we sold it as well. And it was wonderful bread. So you can do a lot with spent grains. Now, one of the other ingredients we have is yeast. And yeast is quite important for your beer. But you can also do a lot of things with the yeast that is a surplus after the production. And part of it is, for instance, we work together with Unilever in the UK, and they use the yeast for making Marmite. Now, I don't know if you have ever tasted Marmite. It's not really my preference, but a lot of people in the UK and maybe also outside, they really love it. So you might know, it's good to know that there's yeast from Heineken in it. Another product we use is Keyzagor, and that is a product to filtrate our beer. And instead of sending it to landfill, we actually work together here in Mexico with a construction company to make cement for construction, for bricks and for buildings, and also for stoves. So it gets a second life. It adds value for communities, and it is also in a more sustainable way. And during this COVID crisis, of course, there has been a lot of questions coming in from, okay, how can we help as a company in these enduring times? And what we do is, because we have an increasing amount of 0% alcohol beer, we have a surplus of alcohol. And what we do, we actually rearrange the whole production in Belgium and the Netherlands. And we have produced 300,000 bottles of hand sanitizer together with another company to distribute to hospitals and nursery homes. And we're now doing that in more than 15 countries around the world. And an interesting partnership we now have with Unilever in Brazil is actually to make a sanitizer which includes alcohol, and the alcohol is coming from our brewery. And these sanitizers are being donated in the favelas in Sao Paulo, and it will benefit millions of people for cleaning and disinfecting areas. Now, going to water, because of course we are here at Dopper and water are interconnected, and also our previous presenter, water was core. The good thing about water is we have as much water as we had millions and millions of years ago, and probably the water you drink might have been the swimming water of the dinosaurs, and maybe they did more things in it that you now, after recycling, have it as water. So actually, circular economy and circular thinking, water is the perfect example for it. But things have changed. We have become in a situation that, of course, we have a big growing population, and estimates is that we'll have 10 billion people living on Earth in 2050. So more and more people need to use water, and they also need to use water that are in their clothes, in eat and food, etc. That's actually the biggest amount of water, the hidden water. There's a lot of poor water management around the world, unfortunately. So we are losing a lot of water, and water is still relatively low price. And then, of course, we have climate change, which exacerbates everything. So we are now seeing regions where there's no rain falling, or there are regions there's too much rain falling. And also here in the Netherlands, we see most of the times abundance of rain, but now already experiencing the second year of drought, and actually not getting enough rain. So what we see is, for our breweries around the world, is that we have more and more breweries experiencing water stress in the areas where they function. And of course, if you don't have water, you cannot brew water. So we feel we have a responsibility there to take action, and not only to take action in our own breweries and to increase water efficiency, but actually to go out and to talk to stakeholders and to work with governments and NGOs to actually take action to reduce the stress on the watersheds. And this is actually an image that summarizes the actions we take in these water-stressed areas around the world. And the strategy, the program is called Every Drop, with clear targets towards 2030, but a holistic approach rather than only focusing on your own production. And of course, it starts with your own production. This is our latest brewery in Milwaukee in Mexico, which is built completely on circular economy principles. And one of the things they have is an effluent reclamation plan. So what they do is, after using the water for brewing beer, actually the wastewater, they treat it back up to drinking water quality so that they can reuse it again, not in the core process of brewing, but in the more non-essential parts of the process, like cleaning. But also, wastewater actually has value, and it's actually very old-fashioned to just treat it and then put it back in the river, because everything that goes into the river will end up in sea, and then it's salt, and you cannot use it anymore for a very long time. So actually, what we said to those breweries in water-stressed areas, can you find other partners in the area, like other businesses or maybe farmers, because farmers use a lot of water, and can they reuse your treated wastewater? So that's one thing they're now finding out. Not a very easy thing to do, because there are a lot of obstacles, but this is really one of the ambitions we have to maximize circularity. And the other thing is actually that you can recover a lot of resources in wastewater that you would otherwise throw away. So one of them is wastewater sludge, and actually we found out that wastewater sludge is a very good fertilizer, an organic fertilizer for farmers. And we tested it in Ethiopia, like here, and also in other countries. And actually farmers are very happy with it, to use it. So we are rolling that out in other countries. All these breweries in water-stressed areas, that they need to balance all the water that they put in the bottle, they need to bring it back into nature. And that means that we are going for zero net impact in these areas. And one of the actions you can take is, for instance, to restore wetlands together with NGOs, because a lot of wetlands and natural environments are under pressure. And this is an image from the Doñana wetlands in Spain, in the south of Spain. It's a very resting place for migrating birds between Africa and Europe. And what we did is we restored those wetlands that were dried up, and we brought the water back together with the NGOs and the government. And we are balancing more than 1 million cubic meters of water every year with that. So making it, let me say, a kind of balancing the water that otherwise would go into the bottle. And that's where I want to finish my presentation, just to share some of the examples we are doing to make our business more circular. I didn't touch our packaging. I didn't touch plastic. There's so many other things to do. It's a difficult journey, but a journey we absolutely believe in.
So thank you so much again for that presentation. And yeah, I guess we will hear from you in a short while. So thank you. All right, so I can't believe that we have already arrived at the last speaker of the evening. And I'm really, really excited about this one because I'm just super intrigued to learn how exactly, the outside sort of natural world impacts our intrinsic motivations and how that impacts how we act as a society more sustainably. So super interested to hear more from you, Nadja Zeiske. Welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Caitlin. I hope you can hear me. Yeah?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Wow, yeah, I'm really enjoying this session. It's been, really nice, ambitious goals from Heineken, and it's fascinating to hear everything. I'm just going to share my screen with you to set up my presentation. All right. So, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be giving you a bit of insight into how we can encourage circular consumption behavior, and I'm going to be talking about this from a psychological point of view. So I'm a researcher at the University of Groningen in the Environmental Psychology Department. And before I get into all of this, I always like to start by explaining what environmental psychology really is, because not everybody is familiar with this field. So as an environmental psychologist, we study the interactions between humans and the environment. So on the one hand, we really look at the effects that nature has on humans. And I think you're probably all familiar with research that has found that if we go out into nature, it has a restorative effect on us, on our well-being. But then on the other hand, we also examine basically how our actions impact the environment. And more specifically, we look at what explains pro-environmental behavior. And psychology really plays a key role in addressing this. And addressing environmental problems in general, because environmental problems, climate change, it is caused by human behavior. And that means that we need to change our behavior. And also the solutions that are proposed to mitigate climate problems, these also need to be accepted and adopted by people. So, people really matter in this issue. And this is actually also the case for a circular economy. So if we look at how we can facilitate a transition to a circular economy, it doesn't only mean that there has to be a change on the industry and supply side, but changes in consumer behavior are really crucial as well. And it's been touched on a little bit before in the other presentations already, but there are just a lot of actual behaviors that consumers or the end user can engage in to participate in a circular economy. So, we can consume less altogether, we can recycle products, we can repair broken products, make use of collaborative consumption services, lend products out, and also just actually actively choose for products that have been manufactured or produced in a circular manner as opposed to ones that have been manufactured in a more conventional manner. All right. So the question really is, how can we then motivate people or encourage sustainable consumption behavior? And why is this important? Well, whether you're a product designer or you're a policymaker, I think it's really important to take the consumer's motivation into account in your design or in your policy. So I'm going to talk you through a few approaches that are commonly taken to motivate sustainable behavior, and then simultaneously talk you through the underlying motivations or factors that these strategies are playing on. So I'm going to be talking about informational strategies, incentives, so using incentives like financial incentives to make sustainable behaviors more attractive, And then also how we can change the context to really support people's intrinsic motivation to act in line with the principles of a circular economy. So informational strategies are very commonly used. So we can think of, knowledge or awareness campaigns, that are just being used all over the world. And the assumption usually is that if we would educate people or make people aware of the causes and consequences of environmental problems associated with behavior, that then people would actually change their behavior accordingly. But actually, what we see is that this might not always be the case. So I'm going to give an example of a study that looked at what the effect is of information provision on people's intentions to reduce plastic bottles, and also whether information has any impact on how acceptable people find policies that are directed at the reduction of plastic bottle use. And actually what the study found is that indeed, providing people with this information leads to an increase in knowledge and awareness. But it may not always be that effective in necessarily motivating behavior change. And actually what the study found is that it's only effective for those people who find the target behavior, so in this case, reducing plastic bottle use, important. So they found that providing people information, it was effective. Those people that thought it was quite important to do so, those were the ones that also said, yes, in the future, they would intend to reduce their use of plastic bottle use. And they also found policies that were directed at this behavior more acceptable. So the bottom line is that informational strategies, they can lead to more awareness, and that's definitely important. But you might actually only target people who, find this issue that you're trying to make people aware of important. So if it's in line with their values. All right. Well, given that people need to engage in so many different types of circular consumption behaviors or sustainability behaviors, we tend to look at more overarching or general antecedents of behaviors. And we see that particularly values play a role here. So values are general goals that people find important in their lives, and they act as guiding principles for our everyday actions. And when we look at sustainability behavior, particularly we look at four goals that are important, four values that are important. First, we look at hedonic goals. And these hedonic values reflect how important it is for you to experience pleasure and to minimize effort. We also look at egoistic values, and these reflect how important you find it as a guiding principle in your life to maximize your resources. So think of money or status. Then we have altruistic values, and these reflect how important you find the well-being of others. And lastly, we have biospheric values, and these really reflect how important you find the quality of nature, that it needs to be preserved. So we endorse all of these four values to a certain extent. So it's not the case that there's somebody who is only or really strongly only endorses egoistic values and another person only endorses biospheric values. We endorse all of these four values to a certain extent, but there is differences to the extent to how strongly you endorse each value. And in general, we find that people that strongly endorse biospheric values, those are the ones that are also more likely to act sustainable across many situations over and over again. So that's not to say that the other values are not important, but we do see that there's the strongest connection between biospheric values and sustainable behavior. But if we look at sustainable behavior or circular consumption behaviors in general, we might see that they might not always be the obvious choice for people to engage in. So they're often costlier, they can be inconvenient, might end up with a lower product quality. So the two examples that I have here is, for example, if your vacuum cleaner is broken and you have the option to either go ahead and order a new one online, or you could go and bring yours for repair. Getting it repaired might actually cost you a little bit more, or might be super inconvenient for you, cost a lot of effort, and just take more time. Similarly, if you are considering buying a new phone, you might consider looking at a refurbished product, but that might mean that you have to choose for an older model because there's more of those that are currently being refurbished. And it might also mean that, you have a lower product quality. So it actually might mean that you're kind of making a trade-off between, on the one hand, wanting to act in line with your biospheric values, and on the other hand, wanting to act in line with your hedonic or egoistic values. And this leads to some kind of a value conflict. And it means that the individual costs of sustainable behaviors might be higher than the collective benefit of it. And then the question is, how can we resolve this conflict, right? How can we then actually motivate people to, even if it is costly, to choose the sustainable option? Well, one way to do this is to make sustainable actions fun, right? To play at people's hedonic values. An example that I like to use here is from the fun theory. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's from Volkswagen. And basically what they do is they kind of incorporate fun into trying to motivate people to use a more sustainable behavior. So on the left-hand side here, you see the infinite trash bin, and they attached a monitor to the inside of the trash can. So whenever you throw something in it, you hear like a sound of the stuff out of your litter kind of falling into this endless pit. And it's really intriguing. So there's videos on YouTube that show people gathering around this trash can, looking around the park, trying to find more trash to pick up in the park. The same goes for the piano stairs. That's the middle picture, where you make a sound when you use the stairs, and then you can actually make music. Or the bottle bank arcade. That's the picture on the right. The aim is to get people to recycle their bottles, and they made a game out of it. So it's quite fun to do. But the thing is that these strategies they might be really effective, right? Because they have this novelty aspect. It's a fun new way of engaging in this behavior. But if we look at sustainable actions, in the long term, most sustainable behaviors aren't inherently fun to engage in. And this novelty aspect might actually wear off after a while. So typically we see that these kinds of interventions might not be effective in the long run. Another way to solve this value conflict is to play at people's egoistic values and use financial incentives to make sustainable behaviors more attractive. So typically, financial incentives kind of offer a temporary extra benefit for people to engage in the behavior, right? So they want to increase the benefits and decrease the costs by making it financially more attractive. And actually, this is quite effective. So while the incentives are in place, usually it works really well to motivate people to change their behavior. But it can also mean that once you remove the incentive, it's no longer effective to do so anymore. And actually, a nice example comes from my own research, where I looked at whether we can motivate car users to commute to work using public transport. And the incentive was a free public transport card. So people could try out public transport for free for 3 weeks. And what we see is that indeed, during that free trial period, the car users actually stepped out of their car and used public transport to commute to work multiple times a week. So that was quite a successful outcome of the intervention. But actually what we saw is that once the free trial period was over, people weren't really motivated to continue to use public transport for free afterwards. And that is because, the financial incentive really gave people this temporary reason to engage in that behavior, but this was no longer effective when it was no longer free. All right. Well, here's another example of looking at whether financial incentives might be effective, or emphasizing the financial gains might be effective in encouraging sustainable behavior. And this study actually wanted to test what's more effective, emphasizing the financial gains of a behavior or emphasizing the environmental gains of a behavior. And the outcome variable here was actually getting people to get a free tire pressure check. So if you are driving with adequate tire pressure on your car, then it means you're driving more fuel efficient. And this has benefits for your wallet, because driving more fuel efficient means you have to spend less money on fuel. But it's also beneficial to the environment, right? So driving fuel efficient means that you have less emissions. So they wanted to see what's more effective in getting people to use this free tire check, emphasizing the environmental gains or the financial gains. And actually what they found was that emphasizing environmental gains outperformed the other two conditions. So the monetary gains condition, or even a control condition where people didn't get any kind of information on what the benefits were. And why is that? Right? I mean, it's quite logical to see that, emphasizing the environmental gains might be a motivation, but why is emphasizing the financial gain not effective or less effective? Well, the authors actually reason that if you think about how much money you're actually saving on having adequate tire pressure in terms of fuel costs, it's very, very little. And actually, this might not be perceived as worth the effort. But actually emphasizing any small environmental gain is actually already perceived as worth the effort. And there's a lot of follow-up research that has shown that indeed people really perceive even small environmental savings, so small savings of CO2, as way more worthwhile than any small financial savings. So the bottom line here is financial incentives can be effective while they're in place, and they have to be perceived as worthwhile, because if they're not, they might actually backfire and be ineffective. And also that even small environmental gains, emphasizing those can actually make people to choose that option more effectively. And the reason for this is that, sustainable behavior or acting circular is actually meaningful, right? So from a kind of moral perspective, we can say it's the right thing to do because it has positive implications for the environment. And actually, there's quite a lot of research showing that these kinds of moral considerations, so biospheric values, those guiding principles that you think it's the right thing to protect the environment, or intrinsic motivation to do the right thing, those are actually important factors that explain people's willingness to engage in circular consumption behaviors. So how can we play at this side of the coin, right? How can we make people more intrinsically motivated to engage in circular consumption behavior? Well, one way would be to actually emphasize the environmental gains. And by emphasizing environmental gains of a behavior, you're actually strengthening people's intrinsic motivation, and that in turn increases the likelihood that you will engage in other sustainable behaviors. But also you can give people feedback on actual previous pro-environmental actions that they've engaged in. So reminding people of the fact that they've actually already engaged in sustainable behavior reminds them that they are the type of person that protects the environment. So that strengthens their identity. And this in turn impacts their intrinsic motivation to act sustainably, which in turn can actually increase other sustainable behaviors. Another way to increase intrinsic motivation is to actually change the context. So when the context is designed in a way that really makes people focus on the environment, people are more likely to act sustainably. So this study here that I'm showing actually designed paper cups in a way that they would try and trigger more these environmental values, so really remind people of the environmental consequences of this paper cup. And they actually found that people that were using the environmental cup, the green cup on the left side, they were around 50% more likely to recycle this cup than people that received a cup with the university logo on it. And it was really interesting to see that this effect was especially pronounced for people who kind of had moderate biospheric values. So people who do think it's important to protect the environment, for those people, really designing a context in such a way that supports their values can really help them take that step and engage in the sustainable action. So people with very low biospheric values, they probably need a bit more than really high intrinsic motivation to engage in the behavior. They're probably already doing so anyways. All right. Actually, this already brings me to the end of my presentation. And I just have a couple of concluding remarks I want to share with you. So I really think that behavior plays a key role in facilitating the transition to a circular economy. And interventions that look at motivation, so that target people's underlying motivations to engage in the behavior, can be way more effective, and information provision might not be enough. Financial incentives can be very effective tools to encourage short-term behavior changes, and emphasizing the financial gains might actually backfire if the financial benefits are not perceived as worth the effort. And instead, even small environmental gains might be perceived as worth the effort. And that's because sustainable actions are meaningful actions. So, facilitating people to act on their intrinsic motivation is also a viable option to get people to act more circular, provided that the context supports this behavior. All right, that's all from me. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and that was just so insightful, and I think I've learned.
I hope that was clear.
Yeah.
Hi, Caitlin.
Yeah, I think we should definitely talk afterwards because I have so many questions for you.
Okay. Yeah, so basically everything I talked about, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg of the type of research that we're doing. So I hope I gave you guys just some insights into, what might be effective strategies, but definitely I'm happy to share more.
Yeah. And I mean, also in the chat box, I think, again, people have been asking a lot of questions. So I think now is actually a good time to maybe start the Q&A session. So maybe if the other speakers would also like to turn their microphones on now, and then I will just go through some of the questions that have been coming through this evening. So let's maybe start with you, Nadja, because
Okay.
it's a question that, you can stay on screen.
Okay.
Because it's a question that came in from Lisbeth. Mm-hmm. And her question is, how is environmental psychology different from psychology behind marketing?
That's a good question. So there's a lot of overlap between the psychology of marketing. So I would say environmental psychology fits into the broader field of social psychology, or in economics, it's also called behavioral science. And that really looks at, okay, what kind of decisions do we make as a consumer? And I think a lot of the theory that we study can also be applied in the context of marketing, for sure. So there is a lot of overlap as well.
Yeah, I think that was another reason why I wanted to talk to you afterwards. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So let's see. We've got another question here. This one is for Kristine. So Kristine, maybe if you wanted to jump on the camera. Hello. Yes, so we received a question from Celine. So her question was, which steps do you think is missing nowadays to reach a circular economy? What is our biggest hurdle? What is that biggest hurdle?
It's a good question. It's a massive question, and I wish I had the answer to it. It's just, I think it's, it comes back to our perception of waste in a lot of ways, that what we buy, what we consume, what we're bringing into our houses, what we wear, that it's okay to think about that as something you throw away after you're done using it. Because circular economy it's not about plastics or only metal, or, it's food and it's transport. And it's really about making sure that everything has a value after you're done with using it for this one function, and then you move on to a new one. And, it's tricky to talk about circular economy as well when with the COVID pandemic unfolding, and where single use is actually one of the axes of trust that we have in terms of our health. So in terms of food and water safety and medical, it can be difficult to move away from plastic, which is an amazing material made to outlive us with hundreds of years. But it's really the mindset that we have. And, we really talk about the design phase and understanding how it has value after the use phase. The first one is over. So lots of hurdles, lots of work to do, but lots of exciting work to do.
Yeah, and I think what you said there, that's, sort of something that we come across at Dopper as well, because, often, I have a wall of plastic Doppers here, and the first question we get asked is, why do you use plastic? But it's not so much about why do you use the material that you use, it's about how you use that material. And if it's, for sustainable ends, if you're using it in a reusable way.
In terms of after we're done using it for this part, then it can become something else after. So I totally agree. That's a mindset that I wish a lot more companies embraced.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So I have a question for Jan-Willem as well. So Jan-Willem, we received a question from Milou. This is also a very big question. What would be your ultimate dream for Heineken regarding a circular company?
Oh, that's a very big question. Yeah, my ultimate dream is, so I think we are on the right path in terms of our own production, but actually the ultimate dream is how can we make packaging, so the packaging that consumers are using, how can we make that much more circular than it is right now? That because that's where we can really make a big impact.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, because I do think that we have maybe time for one or two more questions. And certainly throughout your talk, we received a lot of questions. So give me 1 second. I have them written down here. So what is for you the most important circular challenge for Heineken that you haven't yet been able to solve or address and you might need help for? That came from Lisbeth and Anneke.
I think one of the biggest challenges is packaging. We have very good examples of circularity in packaging in the Netherlands, because we have where we sell beer in glass, it will be brought back to the shops. You need to pay a certain amount for it, and you get the payment back, and then it goes back to the breweries. It's being cleaned and then refilled, and you can refill the glass 20, 30 times. It's absolutely the most sustainable way of using our beer bottles. I would love to see these kind of systems everywhere in the world, but that really needs a system change. That's the biggest challenge, because you need to have a lot of organizations and stakeholders to work to set up this kind of systems. And of course, the Netherlands is quite a small country, but yeah, you can imagine for big countries like Brazil, that is much more challenging.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of stakeholders involved. Great. Well, okay, so I think we have time just for one more question. So let me just quickly have a look here. A lot of questions also came in for Kristine, so maybe we can do just one more for Kristine. So let's see. Kristine, you were talking about the avoid approach. So a question came in also from Lisbeth. Wow, asking a lot of questions tonight. What does TOMRA do specifically around the avoid approach?
So the avoid approach is, in this context, refers specifically to plastic packaging. And, that's a conversation that we need to have, which is, as a global society, it's a very honest conversation we need to have about, we've weaved plastic very much into the fabric of our modern life. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we need to have honest conversations about what belongs in the avoid bubble. Where can we really move into different materials, such as glass bottles, metal cans for beer? What is the function that we're delivering, and what is the right material for it? Obviously, if you're transporting across the globe a product that you made, the climate impact, although circularity is so much more than just climate, the climate impact of glass is higher than plastic. But in some cases, when you have a closed loop system, as you do in the Netherlands, glass serves, a real and sustainable purpose. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's really about informing the stakeholders that we work with, whether it's consumers, governments, it's other industry partners, about what is the right kind of material, because we know once you've done in the use phase, where can it go into the value chain and what can you do with it after? So it's really about having those conversations, but also in a way, avoid very much comes from our personal choices and through legislation, which comes with the Single-Use Plastic Directive in the EU now as well. And we're an enabler of making sure the value chains of other people are as circular and other entities are as circular as possible. So trying to be a knowledge provider, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a recurring theme as well that we're hearing, just, engaging stakeholders and working together and really that system change. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for providing that answer. And I think that's about all the time that we have for the Q&A session tonight. But what we will do is we will collect all of the questions and we'll try to get the speakers to answer these questions for you afterwards. And we will then publish it in an interview on our blog. So keep your eye out for that, and we will try and get all of the answers back to you. So that concludes the formal part of this evening, but we did promise you an exclusive announcement as well. So this is something, as I mentioned before, we've been working on for months and months. It's an initiative that we're calling the Dopper Wave, because we believe that with simple everyday actions, anyone can help to turn the tide. So we are inviting companies, organizations, events, and individuals to pledge to ban single-use water bottles. So we would like to invite everyone here to join us on World Oceans Day when we're launching this amazing initiative, and to be a drop in a massive wave powerful enough to save our oceans. So now, this is not working. There we go. A really beautiful image there. We would love for you guys to join the wave. So keep an eye out on your emails, because we will be giving you exclusive early access the first week of June to sign up and to pledge. And then we would love for you to actually share your commitment and sort of share it with the world that you are part of this movement. So to conclude, this is it, guys. And first of all, I want to thank our speakers, really, just so much. Thank you. It was such an inspiring evening. I really enjoyed hearing from you all. So Kristine, Jan-Willem, Nadja, thank you so much. I also want to give a special thank you to the Student Hotel and Amber Westerbork. Thank you so much for joining us, and also thank you for supporting the event. And then last but not least, I want to thank all of the attendees. So you guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a beautiful night out there, so I'm really glad that you were able to make the time to join us for this event. And I hope that you learned something, and I hope that it inspired you, and I hope that it motivated you in some way to build a better future. So from the entire team at Dopper, I want to send you good waves, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, and good night.